Hi there. Today what we're going to do is we're going to take up our first couple of activities in the law of supply and demand. So what you should have seen is this, right? This page with a link to a data set that of course was mine that you couldn't change, so you had to make your own copy. So the first thing you would do when this happens, if I don't share something with you, make yourself a copy of this data set. Now the data might look different when you get it because time may have passed, the numbers may be different. But generally speaking, what you want to then do is either copy the data to a sheet you've made or go file and make a copy. Give it whatever name you like. I'm not going to call it anything because this is just a demo. And what you'll find is you've got a whole bunch of different quantities here of people who responded to the survey. That was your first sort of task. What does that mean? Does it mean 17 people want to buy coffee at Starbucks if it's $4 for, I don't know, a generic cup of coffee? Well, no, because there are people who said they'd pay more than that, right? So that means the number of people who want to pay $4 is going to be everybody who said 4 is my limit and everybody who said more than 4 they'd buy, right? Which changes the quantity of people who would buy on that day at every price level, because you have to add in everybody who was willing to pay a higher price. So what you want to do is you want to start right here. And in this cell you can clearly see that there's going to be 35 people that would buy coffee at $5, right? The 10 that said 5 and the 25 that said more than 5. What we're going to do is we're going to click the cell above. We're going to equal cell above 35, and what we're going to do is we're going to add to it the cell 2 to the left, 7. That gives us 42, right? When you copy formulas, it does the same thing. Or sorry, it keeps them relative. So if before you were adding the cell above, or taking the cell above and adding 7 to it, which is 2 cells to the left, when you copy the formula down, it will do the same thing. It'll take the cell above and add the number 2 cells to the left. Well, guess what? That's now a cumulative total. If you keep going all the way to $0, you get the total quantity of people that would pay at 50 cents or higher, being 166, right? And so now what you've got is a relationship between price and the number of people who would be willing to buy at that price. That's a relationship. That relationship is called demand. So at any given price, there's a quantity that people will demand, but when you just say, as the video said, when you just say demand, you're talking about the whole relationship. To insert a graph, what you have to understand is that Google assumes the first column of data is going to be your x-axis. Well, economists like to put quantity on the x-axis. They just do. Okay? So that means this has to be x, and this has to go over here. It's annoying. I agree. So now if we highlight both and we go insert chart, and because there's nothing in between each price level or quantity for that matter, it's not continuous data. You should not, if you're a data management student, you should not be picking continuous data graphs like line graphs. You should be picking a scatter plot under chart types right here. Okay, and it will look like this, and it should. And once we insert it, you've got this histogram, which you can then, it's not actually a histogram, you've got this chart, which you can then say is, I don't know, demand for Starbucks coffee. And you can add, you can take away the legend, you can also add an X and a Y axis if you really want to. Now this here, this drop off, let's think about that drop off for a minute. What is it saying? It's saying as you drop price, you're getting a couple more people that will say, yeah, I'll buy. But generally speaking, after this point, nobody really wants it. They don't like coffee. They're not coffee drinkers. So it's almost like your demand line is this. And if you want to, once we get into it, you can actually estimate a demand line, right? If you go here under Advanced Edit, again for data management students, down here there's an option for a trend line. Right towards the bottom, you can add a trend line. There's different types. Linear is just a straight line. If you want it to match what you've sort of got, you can play around with the different ones. So this looks more like the demand lines you saw in the video lesson. Let's just do a line like this, for instance. You can then put on some different things, including the equation. You can even show the equation on the line, right? We'll use the equation. So there's your equation. Update. If you grab this, it'll actually give you the option of moving and resizing. You can area so that you can make the legend bigger if you want to. Now, I would have probably gotten rid of this data before I put a straight line in representing my demand line. But this equation here is your demand line, which eventually you're going to need later in this unit. And instead of y equals some negative slope times x plus an intercept, what you're saying is price equals some negative slope times the quantity plus how much someone would pay at zero quantity. So that's the intercept of B over here, right? And that's your equation for demand, which you can use in other ways later. So, what is a demand line then? Let's think about it. As you saw in the video, it's a whole bunch of different things. I was looking more for what does the line represent as a whole, and what it represents is the relationship between price and the quantity that people want at that price. When taken as a whole, what it means is the whole feeling and sentiment towards that product, right? Where the line is, in other words, if it's farther off to the right in the areas where there's more quantity, it means a lot of people want that product at those prices. The slope of the line is also important, right? By now in grade 12, you should know that the slope of a line represents the rate of change. So the steeper the slope, it's called elasticity, we'll talk more later, but the steeper the slope of the demand line, when you change price, you don't get much of a change in quantity. So slope matters too. So the whole line is that relationship, the whole sort of market's attitude towards that good or service, right? And that's important to understand, because if you know what went into the line, then you know what affects that position or that slope. In other words, demand. When economists say demand or supply, they're talking about the whole line, the entire relationship. And as you know, all of these things go into making up demand. It's quite fascinating, really. You can just ask that one question. Really, you should ask how much would you buy too. So what's the most you would pay and how much would you buy at that price? And you know what demand is. You don't have to do research into all taste and preferences, income levels, all that stuff, because all you have to do is ask that one question, and the respondent's going to think about all of those things. The result, you're going to get a demand line that incorporates all of those aspects. That's what a demand line really is.